Welcome back to another episode of Building Up Your Business, the podcast. I am Erica Dill with Operationally Up, your host. Remember, Operationally Up is here to build your consumer goods and e-commerce business with maximum profitability, helping out those operation processes and supply chain. You are joined us for another wonderful episode. We're going to be talking about building out your marketing function before you can actually afford one. And joining us is Vanessa Ting. Vanessa, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Hey, Erica.
It's going to be another good one. I know it. Vanessa's one of my favorites. So
We have to
Vanessa
know
is
that.
a I was not paid to say that, I promise. Vanessa is a fractional CMO with 20 years experience in CPG and retail, including roles at Neutrogena, Target, and as the CEO of a Better For You food startup. She has launched and scaled food, beauty, personal care, and wellness brands, revitalizing market performance and preparing companies for national retail success. Vanessa also has advised international brands entering the U.S. market, helping growth stage business hit their next milestones with clear consumer-driven strategies. Known for building and strengthening marketing teams, she equips companies with the structure and leadership needed to scale sustainably, which makes her the perfect guest when we're talking about building out that marketing function. And we all know that if you had your last dollar to spend, you should be spending it on marketing. But if you don't have that dollar, you should still be building out a marketing functioning. And that's why Vanessa is here to tell us all about it. So let's just dive right into all the good stuff. I like to hit the ground running. So why is having a marketing function or marketing team or marketing services so critical early on, even before founders feel like ready or that they need to have it?
Yes, because there are so many foundations that your first marketer will build for the company that will set the tone and set the cadence for everything that is to come. Because as the founder or CEO, you have a vision, you have goals, you have even philosophies. But what does that all mean in terms of what a consumer will experience, right? Because you want that same vision to carry through with every consumer touch point. And so that is the role of the marketer at the end of the day, is to tell that cohesive, compelling, consistent story time and again so that you're building a brand equity and brand value over time. So what does that mean specifically in kind of like, a marketing checklist? Well, that first marketer that you bring on board well before you launch, they're building your brand strategy, right? And that brand strategy includes your verbal identity and then your visual identity. And so many founders think that a brand strategy or brand identity is all about the logo and the colors and your font type. And that is only 1/20th of what a brand strategy is, right? So even before you land on what your brand looks like from that visual standpoint, you need to figure out who your consumer is that you're targeting, how you're targeting them, uniquely and specifically, what value and benefit are you bringing to them, and that all basically is your brand strategy. Excuse me. And there are other aspects to it as well: brand personality, brand tone, et cetera, brand promises. But it is a very, important endeavor to really hone in on your brand strategy and make sure it's tight, but also broad enough to be the platform for growth. So that is the biggest reason you want to bring on someone early on, to have that all align with your vision and philosophy. But also you want them to, weigh in on the products that you're building, right? They'll be able to tell you if there is potential consumer, product market fit. You'll also want to bring them on to start creating demand early on. You don't want to launch to an audience of zero. You
Yeah.
want to launch to an audience that is like, ready and wanting to buy because you really solve a need for them. And I think in addition to all of these things, if you really want, groundbreaking marketing and really effective marketing, you need to have this person be with you before launch for some time. not only to, learn the business, but to have enough time to come up with really creative, disruptive, innovative ideas. Those ideas don't happen overnight. It comes through a really deep understanding of your business and your consumer. So that is my soapbox. I will
Yeah.
something else.
Well, and I think one of the things that especially like founder-led businesses really have going for them is that they are passionate about their product and they have these very specific, unique mission and vision and guiding principles. And at the end of the day, people identify with the products that they buy. Why are they going to buy your product over somebody else's product? And I think, Vanessa, you would agree that a lot of that is because of your brand story and because of what you're telling through your marketing, your marketer. But you can't convey that to your customer without somebody, without a marketer to help put that together. Would you agree?
Agreed. There are two things that get consumed. Well, there's more than two, but I'm boiling it down to two for the purposes of this conversation. Two things that makes your product stand out to a consumer. Yes, you're correct. Brand is one of them. The brand story, brand differentiation, brand values, basically how you are establishing rapport with your consumer. The second piece is product differentiation, but generally speaking, I find that most founders do a good job of figuring out a product that is differentiated than the current options in the market because that's usually kind of their impetus for
Sure.
starting their business. But those two things are important, and the brand differentiation is the one that not all founders are equipped to build out. They might have a seedling or an idea nugget for what that might be, but really it's the marketer that finesses it, puts nuances to it, and makes it really truly a strong differentiated brand.
Well, and like you said, they have this differentiator. They know why their product is different, but learning how to speak to that clientele that's going to be your buyer, you have to be able to identify who that clientele is first, and then you have to speak their language,
Exactly.
which as a founder, you may not have the skills to do that, but that's where your marketer can really come into play.
Yeah, yeah. And not only is it how to speak to them, but also how to prioritize your messages. Because as a founder, you have a list of 30 reasons why a consumer will like your brand or product. But at the end of the day, we don't have the ability to say all 30.
All
And
30.
it
Yeah.
probably is usually just three that really motivate purchases, right? Like there's just three that are really important to your target consumer, and you need to figure out what those three are. That's what a marketer does, right? They figure out who your consumer target is, what their unmet needs are, and how your product or brand attributes stack up against those unmet needs, and and then you can prioritize and then fire away with your messaging.
I love that. So you're talking about early stage companies, you're talking about even before they go to market. Like we said, if they had their last dollar, spend it on marketing. But what are some tips on stretching that dollar, when it comes to bringing on their first marketer? What are some things some ideas that we can give these founders about how do they start off?
Well, I know I'm preaching to the choir with profitability and with managing your financials properly, but you won't have many marketers say this, but the very first thing that you need to have in place to set up your first marketing hire for success is a budget. You need to have your sales projections and you need to have a budget tied to it. Of course, your first marketer will have a say on whether that they think that budget is enough or not enough, but you know what? It doesn't matter because if you're tying that budget to a certain break even point or cash flow positivity point, ultimately that dictates your budget, and you give that budget to the marketer, and then they have free reign to spend it how they think is most appropriate pending alignment with the founder. But honestly, if you really want to be truly effective, you need to know exactly what your budget is before you start spending it. Because then
Yeah.
you have no discipline then in how you're allocating that marketing fund across different marketing channels or, different marketing line items. This is where you lose discipline, and then And frankly, this is what truly happens with a lot of, first time founders. They'll be very loose with, with budgets and spending. And you then bring in a marketer who doesn't have that own discipline themselves. And all of a sudden they're spending money haphazardly. They're throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, as opposed to coming up with a very tight hypothesis for how to spend money. And, it's a very different way of operating if you don't hold
Sure.
that first marketer to, to discipline.
Well, and that, we're talking about, sometimes these companies are on really tight budgets and, marketers are creative people to begin with. So I'm sure that they can get very creative with a budget. Just spread that creativity through. But you don't know that until you actually have that budget. And a lot of times companies are like, oh, we can't afford that, or we don't have money. Well, look at that budget and plan ahead. And if you're doing your, like right now, if you're doing your 2026 planning, which I hope everybody is, like that's where you find time and where you find resources for that marketer. And I can imagine if you're especially talking about ad spending can probably get out of control really quick, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's so tempting to just, add on $30 more per day, per budget, per ad set, and all of a sudden, yeah, your ad spend has ballooned. But you hit the nail on the head, Erica. Marketers are creative, so you give them guardrails, and they will figure out a creative way to deliver impact with the money they have. And sure, if you have less money to spend, you have more modest sales projections, but again, that's part of tying a budget to projections. You see kind of the give and take between the two, and at least then you are, if you have a smaller budget, there should be no shock when your sales, actually, just to restate, if everyone's aligned on those budget and how the budget ties to the projections, the CEO and founder know well in advance that you are going to only hit this number because that's all your marketing fund allowed, and that's fine. But the worst part is when you have like a founder who's got this, really aggressive vision for growth, and a marketer who's spending money haphazardly, and then all of a sudden, either they spend too much or they spend too little, but then you don't hit your sales results, and now you don't know why.
And you don't know why.
Conversation, but yeah, I think a lot of people are surprised by how, how much financials come and budgeting comes into the conversation about marketing. Not enough time is spent having this conversation between marketers and founders at the beginning.
Yeah, I would argue that founders don't spend enough time on budgeting to begin with. And then, when you talk about bringing on other team members and setting expectations, we always want to talk about clear expectations, clear KPIs, clear is kind, if you know. So, I mean, it translates into your marketing department as well. So those founders are looking to bring on their very first marketing hire. What do they look for in that first marketer that might be different from, later on down the road? Obviously bringing the right people on at the right time. So what are they looking for in that first hire?
Yeah, so I think, before you decide on what type of hire that first marketing hire will be, the founder should take a really good look at their own marketing competencies. Some founders, of course, are more marketing inclined than others. But even some founders have the ability to kind of wing it with marketing. Like there might be some founders that maybe they don't have a marketing background, but they themselves love being in front of the camera and create content and create content. So, it's really important for that founder to look and see, okay, what are they good at? What do they enjoy doing in the realm of marketing? And now let's hire someone who complements that, or who knows how to channel that core competency that you do have. Because ultimately, as the founder, you want to build out a team, especially at the beginning, that offsets any gaps that you might have and complements you nicely. And that's the same thing with that first marketing hire as well. With that in mind, you also have to really, make a choice between, do I want to hire a strategic marketer at the start, or do I want to hire a junior marketer who
Interesting.
may not know as much strategy, but can probably, can probably figure things out and is scrappy
Yeah.
enough to to have some marketing competencies and figure things out. And again, I always say the best choice is someone more strategic, especially
Mm,
if the founder themselves is not strategic with marketing and
sure.
understand marketing concepts. But it's a budget conversation. Sometimes a founder feels like they can give direction to a junior marketer enough to get going, and that's not a bad approach either. Because sometimes you need to just hit a certain point of critical mass before you can actually hire your first, strategic marketing hire. So I think it depends on a little bit of, how aggressive are your growth goals. If you're growing organically, you're not venture funded, maybe you can get by with a junior marketer, giving them direction and kind of learning yourself how to guide them. That is a perfectly fine approach. It really is.
Hmm.
Or if you are venture funded, which usually means you have very aggressive growth goals, because you need to, hit that valuation as soon as
Right.
possible, then you are probably thinking about, all right, we need a strategic hire because that person is going to not only lay a foundation so we don't waste time, hitting our goals, but also they'll come in with a set of tools and a framework for going about how to attack this, the marketing problems ahead of them. Really, a CMO is identifying what are the chief marketing hurdles that we have in front of us and how do we reduce those barriers, and what is our very focused plan to get through those barriers and to hit our goals. And that requires a little bit of experience, but also a set of frameworks to figure out. And again, not all junior marketers are adept at figuring that out. So that's probably why you want a strategic marketing hire if you are in fact building growth fast.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I know that you will agree, but sometimes that first marketing hire could be a fractional CMO. So people have a lot of different options. They don't have to hire, a chief right away, 100%. There's flexibility there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is why the profession of fractional CMOs has really flourished in the last 10 years. It's because there's such a great need for that strategic thinking. But obviously, when you're early stage, once you have a solid plan and you have someone to help kind of guide the team, you don't need a CMO full time. You just don't.
Right.
So yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. Like it's been a real this world of fractional CMOing has just exploded because of that very need and opportunity.
Yeah, it's nice to know that founders have options when it comes to that first hire.
Yeah.
So they're thinking about bringing on this first hire. How do they kind of balance, especially if you're talking about bringing on like a junior person? How do they balance, managing and giving direction versus giving them room to grow and function? I mean, I know this question can be applied to a lot of different topics, but in this world, like in the stance of hiring that first marketer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great question because I'll be honest, like junior marketers are fantastic, but they'll still need a lot of guidance,
Yeah.
especially when there's a lot in marketing that's very ambiguous and not to overuse the word creative, and sometimes experience helps with filling in the gaps quickly, filling in that ambiguity quickly. So, balancing giving a marketer enough direction versus giving them, room to shape the function. I think the important thing for a founder to do is really set the vision, share what their philosophy for growth is. So the vision is the brand vision where they see things, this is kind of the lofty kind of, goals. Like, it's really important for that first marketer to understand that so that they have enough direction. But then there's also a philosophy, right? Maybe a founder's philosophy is, I know, I want to grow aggressively and I'm willing to spend a lot at growing aggressively, but we have to measure and then change course quickly. Like,
Yeah.
fail fast,
You're
So
right.
right? That could be one philosophy. Another philosophy might be a little bit more conservative. I want to be very focused. I want to try one thing at a time. So it's really important for that first marketer hire to have an understanding of that founder's philosophy. So I think between philosophy, vision, um, establishing the brand itself, the brand strategy creates
Sure.
parameters and guardrails. I think when you have just some of those very fundamental things in place, you don't then need to give that marketer too much direction, right? Assuming that they can execute themselves and figure things out themselves, because I made that caveat at
Right.
the beginning.
Yeah.
Not all junior marketers can guide themselves. But if you have those parameters in place, that should be enough direction for that marketer. Again, if it's a junior marketer, you'll probably want to have more structure in place, more guardrails in place. Maybe this is an opportunity to bring in a fractional CFO for a one-time project to set those guardrails, to set kind of
Right.
some ground rules, so to speak, and then let that marketing junior marketer kind of run with it. Yeah, so for that junior marketer, you might have to say, we're only going to do social media and it's only going to be organic. Run with it.
Run with
You
it.
may have to, kind of, get that narrow. So you're not micromanaging. You're just being very focused. So you know, um, they have, a scope clearly defined, but not, over prescribed.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, they are creative. So, you only want to put them in a box so much.
Yes, correct.
But that box is important. Like you have to have somewhere to put, to give them guidance.
Yeah.
So I think the question, and I've had so many clients bring this up and, go back and forth on it, in-house versus outsourcing. Like, how do founders kind of make that decision or understand what might be best to be outsourced? Because you don't have to do everything in-house, but how do you find that balance?
Yeah, yeah. And truth be told, it'll always be a mix. And again, sometimes a founder's philosophy will dictate if it's going to be mostly in-house versus mostly outsourced. And, then you just have to structure your department, accordingly. But I think the easiest way to really figure out an answer to that question is first looking at, every company has what will eventually be their unfair marketing advantage. What this basically means is there is inherently something within the founder's experience or within the founder's personal network or business network that is a unfair advantage for them. So, for example, I have one client I'm working with who they're a family-owned business. They've been around for 10 years. They first started out making high protein products for athletes in their city, and they professional athletes started coming to them for products, et cetera, et cetera. So they kind of organically built this strong network of professional athletes. Fast forward to now, 10 years later, we had a rebrand, going to market with a completely different approach, but that we're leaning on that unfair marketing advantage, as kind of our way of accelerating growth. We're tapping into that network to spread the word about the brand. We're using them to create content. We're using them as a proof point. So all to say, it will have, take a look at what your unfair marketing advantage is and decide that that's what you want to exploit, and then make sure that that competency is in-house. You don't ever want to outsource something that will become your unfair marketing advantage. Right. So that's
Interesting.
one important way of thinking about it. And again, it's kind of following that same framework. Look and see what your strengths are and protect that in-house and outsource the rest that are not our strength, that are not your strengths. That's generally the first way to kind of cut at it. After that, then it's taking a look at, and I never truly outsource everything entirely, because even when you outsource social media, for example,
Sure.
you still should have someone in-house who has a strong competency in managing social media. So now that person, rather than doing the actual maybe content creation or doing the actual scheduling and writing of captions, maybe what they're doing now is thinking really creatively about how to grow on social media. What types of influencer partnerships make sense, or what, interesting ways of what content strategy, interesting content strategy ways there are to implement. Because when you outsource, you don't get creative thinking. You get people who are experts at executing, and they're going to be playing that same playbook for client after client after client. So again, even if you outsource, you still have to have someone thinking very strategically or creatively in-house and leading and being that thought leader in-house. So, okay, to answer your question, after all that, to bring it to the to the question at hand, I think you have to look at you outsource the things that honestly just aren't as important to you in your marketing strategy and your marketing plan, right? So keep the things that are an unfair marketing advantage. Keep the things in house that are truly important to growth, and the things that are busy work, the things that are more, I think, resource intensive, like content creation and social media. Outsource that, with the caveat that someone in-house has to make sure that excellence is being achieved by those agencies and partners, that they're not just ringing it in, phoning it in with the same tired playbooks. You got to push them to think differently, and that's the key.
Well, and I love that you bring this point up because we've talked about this on the podcast before, but every time I get a chance to talk about it, I love it. But one of the keys to managing those outside vendors is to manage them, and have that person in-house that can keep them on track. And because people time and time again, especially in marketing, they get an outsource partner and they're like, yeah, but they didn't give us the results and all outsource partners are horrible. And it's like, no, there's some great ones out there, but how did you manage them? You have to almost treat them like they're an internal team member to get the results that you want. So I love that you brought that up.
Yes. And another endorsement for strategic marketing hires, that is also a value they bring. They know exactly how to brief agencies and brief partners and set them up for success. Like there is such an intangible, unrealized value. I mean, people realize that value, but usually after making mistakes and doing it the wrong way. But like that is really what these more senior hires bring. It's so important for execution, and marketing is all about execution. Ideas are a dime a dozen in marketing.
Sure.
It's execution. And I mean, that's the saying for business in general. It's all about execution. But there's so many ways to flop on marketing execution. There really is.
So let's talk, we've been talking a lot about bringing on that first marketer, and we talked about executing, on those marketing ideas. Is there a framework or a phased approach or something to building out that marketing team in the first hire from scratch? What would you recommend to somebody?
For building out that team, okay, hopefully maybe this will help, but I see a marketing department in kind of four main buckets.
Okay.
And how you hire and how you outsource, what you definitely want someone in each one of these buckets. The order in which you bring them on, again, depends on your marketing plan and your marketing strategy, which again probably echoes my recommendation to always bring a strategic hire on first. So,
see previous statement.
Exactly. So, okay, here are the four buckets. In no particular order. One is acquisition, right? So this is the team member who is, launching paid ads to bring in new customer leads. It's all ads. Then you have brand marketing. So the brand marketing member of the team is the one that is feeding your acquisition team member with the content and the messaging, right? And this content and messaging has already been vetted for aligning with your target market, speaking the language that you need to speak to, the key messages. The brand marketing team is really in charge of of owning the communications, if you will, the visual and verbal communications to the consumer. So they feed that content to the acquisition team. The third department, if you will, is the creative teams. They're the ones who are taking direction from the brand marketers. Okay, you want an ad asset that looks like this and has this type of, basically like the brand marketing team is guiding the creative team to create the actual assets. That will include like graphic designers, content creators, or whoever's managing the content creators, copywriters. They're the ones who are creating the magic. So you have these three departments, and then kind of, sitting across all of them is going to be like the department or the team hire that is the strategic one, the one that I keep talking about. Right? They're the ones who are actually, owning the strategy, right? So not only have they now just built you a brand strategy, now they're taking a look at what the marketing goal, what the corporate goals are for the next year or next, 1 to 3 years, and then figuring out, okay, how do we get there with marketing? What are the marketing problems that need to be solved for us as a company to hit those goals? What are the, and oftentimes it's getting a consumer to do something, right? If you're in consumer
Sure.
marketing,
Right.
getting a consumer to do something so that you hit your goals. Consumer to buy, do this, and then buy, to hit your goals. Well, in order for a consumer to do that action, there are usually speed bumps or hurdles or friction points, right? So, part of the strategy is figuring out how to get a consumer through those pain points and friction points very quickly and very easily. And then also figuring out, what is their path to purchase, and we're going to align our marketing along those path to purchase points, because that's how we not only remove their obstacles but get them to the point of sale as fast and efficient as possible. That all that mumble jumble I just said, those are frameworks, right? These are frameworks and tools for how to make, how to build a marketing strategy and a marketing plan. So the brand marketing team, the acquisition team, the creative team, they can't pull together what they need to do without that marketing plan, telling them, what needs to be done. So, that is kind of the role that strategic person plays in bringing marketing to life. Brand marketing, acquisition, creative, they are more on the execution side, right? But you also need kind of that quarterback to call the plays. And, those are, to me, the four kind of functions within marketing. That strategic hire should ideally also have the ability to also see and plan ahead, especially as it relates to innovation, right? So the founder will usually be pretty involved in developing new products, but as we all know, creative geniuses need to be kind of, put into guardrails and, ensure that, you're launching a product that, not only makes sense for the brand, but, is going to have consumer demand and sales. And so this strategic marketer needs to also make sure that they're doing innovation planning and being very thoughtful about the brand architecture and how the product lines, kind of how the product innovation that is to come will help build the brand's equity and not dilute the brand. So, these are kind of, concepts within marketing, but yeah, all to say, as you build out a department, you want to kind of have, resources in each of these four areas. Again, which one you start with depends on where you don't have a core competency, because you want to start filling out the gaps first. But,
Sure.
if you were to ask me and probably a lot of people, the first hire should be someone strategic, even if part-time. Now that there are fractional CMOs available, you should
Right.
hire a strategic person part-time, and then, they can help fill out the rest of the areas of marketing.
Yeah, for a scrappy company, you don't have to start with full time for that strategic partner, and probably you're not going to have enough work for them unless they start doing some of the executing pieces. Which, as we all know, the people who are the big picture thinkers, the strategy people, don't do so well at the executing nitty gritty stuff. Two separate mindsets for that. So, and I
Yeah.
love that you pointed out. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. And you can have someone that does both, but you don't want them to do both, because that really will come at the expense of the big picture thinking. And that is so important to
Right.
keep everyone on track.
Right, right. I love that you pointed out the different buckets because, like you said in the very, very beginning, you're talking about people think marketing and branding is like, oh, it's my logo and my colors. But, when you think about those different buckets, there is so many different pieces that go into having a marketing team and the different aspects that they cover. So I'm glad you were able to explain that for all of us. So I always like to wrap up my episodes with, one tip that somebody can take away. And when it comes to marketing, if we're spending our last dollar on marketing, what is the one thing that companies can do and put that $1 on that's always going to have a return?
I will die on this hill. Consumer insights. I know. Other people
Oh,
might
okay.
say ads, or other people might say, I don't
Right.
know. I don't know what other people might say, but I will most certainly say, based on my own experience, hearing from and learning from others, knowing your consumer helps bring so much clarity, wastes a lot of time, or sorry, saves a lot of time that would be wasted, saves a lot of money that could be wasted in just in being aimless. But what I mean by understanding your consumer is it's beyond just reading what their social media comments are. It goes beyond reading, their, you know, um, customer service inquiries. It goes beyond just talking to a handful of folks. It really is a matter of understanding both who your current customer is and what makes them loyal, what they love about your brand, what they love about your products, and then also figuring out who the consumer is that you need to go after next. And they all should be the same consumer, more or less, with slight nuances. But this idea of understanding your consumer helps provide it's a north star. They're not going to give you all the answers, and of course, what consumers say is sometimes a reflection of the past, but you just need there's so much noise out there that
Yeah.
talking to consumers will always bring clarity. And when I say talking to consumers, it's, getting on the phone with 10 different consumers, 10 different phone calls, and you're going to start hearing by phone call 4 trends and similarities. And then in phone calls 5 through 8, you're going to really hone in on the things that rose to the top consistently. And then by calls 9 and 10, you're hearing those same things, but now able to get more deep into them. Now now you're asking them questions above and beyond what you were asking people earlier, and you're really getting
Yeah.
into the why and into so much of the context. And then after that 10th phone call, you have so much more clarity on how you need to move forward. On what, I don't know, but it usually comes out in that call, right? It could be any of
Yeah,
the
it'll come out then.
yeah, yeah, right. So, and so many companies, it's funny in the startup world in CPG for the past, 15 years, it's been a free for all. There's been tremendous amount of growth and so much money thrown at these companies. In the last, 3 to 5 years, funding has gotten a little bit more tighter. People are having to be a lot more mindful of
A
margin. Whether they
lot,
weren't
yeah.
before, I don't know, but they have to be a lot more mindful of profitability. And you're now seeing companies lean in on consumer insights to target their messaging to get a better sense of who their consumers are as they move into different channels of growth, of sales rather. And then as they're developing new products, they're able to validate these products in advance before spending the hundreds and thousands of dollars on developing new products and putting out to market only for it to fail.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
Right.
risk mitigation and a lot more precision happening by just taking, what is usually not very much money to do consumer insights work. So that is actually where I'm seeing a lot of opportunity right now for a lot of, startups that have been around for a few years now. Like this is how they're now leveling up to the next growth stage. This is how they're, digging in and getting scrappy, but also being smart in how they're being scrappy. So yeah, I think that's the wisdom I have to impart on anyone listening. Start doing that consumer insights, informally even now, and you will be in a much better, position in a year from now.
Well, and I love that you brought it up a couple of different ways, but consumer insight can be the tipping point for so many things, right? You talked about for how you speak to your customers, what type of language are they using, so that you can then go reuse that in your marketing. But you
Mhm.
also brought up new product development.
Mhm.
So, how many times do companies and how much money do companies spend on new product development? Where if you listen to your customer in the first place, you can bring that failure rate a lot further down and that cost down because you already know what you're developing as opposed to figuring it out later on.
Exactly, exactly. And in addition to that, you also get a sense for which products have a lot of passion and heart and excitement from customers behind it. And
Mm.
you might be launching, two or three products in a given year, but there's one that you've heard just consistently from consumers that it is like, it is mega. So then to put your marketing dollars behind that launch. But not only that, all of that information helps you with your sell in to retailers, for example, if you're
Mm-hmm.
CPG, or
Oh,
it
sure.
helps you with getting investors excited or, kind of mitigating some of the risk that investors might feel with certain things, or getting your board members on board with, with certain initiatives and certain products. So it also helps facilitate a lot of conversations and get a lot more people to yes that might sit on the fence before saying yes.
Yeah, love that. What a great tip to leave our listeners with. So, thank you so much for joining us, Vanessa. This has been truly insightful.
Wonderful having me. It was wonderful to be here, and thank you for having me. And it was just so fun to chat with you about marketing and building teams and doing so profitably, which is something both you and I are very passionate about.
Oh, absolutely. Saving that dollar. You've joined us on another episode of Building Up Your Business, the podcast. I am Erica Dill, your host with Operationally Up. You join us every 2 weeks for episodes. So remember, from bombs to order fulfillment, marketing to taxes, learn the stuff from the pros before you step in it. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. So until then, have a wonderful week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.